Welcome back. We're going to look at jump rings today. You can purchase jump rings in quantity and they're pretty inexpensive, but all of these ones that were kind of prefabbed and purchased, they're usually a steel base that's plated, so I don't suggest soldering with them. But if you have to make a whole bunch of them for your own piece, it always looks cleaner and handcrafted if you make your own, so we'll get to that in a second. But just some basics of jump rings in terms of opening and closing. You're going to take 2 chain pliers or needle nose pliers, and there is an opening to the jump ring. And if you put your pliers facing each other, and the opening is right here where my fingernail is, what you're going to do is just slightly turn one wrist and hold the other steady. So I'm just going to open it front to back rather than, and then back to front to close it. So some of you guys will be using this just for maybe a bail for a necklace where you just have a simple hole and you just kind of thread that in, and then once it's threaded in, you go back and close that. Notice I did not let go of it with this hand. It tends to make it easier, then you don't have to get set up again. So once I close that, then I'm ready to go. So I actually have 2 jump rings in there. And jump rings come in every different kind of shape and size and thickness of wire. So if you're going to make your own jump rings, you will want to choose the thickness of your wire. If you pick something like 14 gauge wire, you're going to be looking at having really thick, bulky jump rings. This is not even quite 14 gauge. If you're going to larger jump rings, you definitely want something a little bit thicker, so 16 or 14 gauge for a size this big. If you are looking at something smaller, you probably don't want to have these large bulky jump rings, so you're looking at something closer to 16 or 18 gauge. If you get really, really thin, sometimes structurally they don't do what you need them to do. So we're going to go ahead and create a whole bunch of jump rings out of 16 gauge. So choosing the inside diameter of your jump ring is kind of next, and you want to have something to kind of wrap your wire around. So I have my 16 gauge wire out here ready to go, and then I'm going to choose how big the inside diameter is. So if I have something like this, now keep in mind you're going to be wrapping the wire around the outside of it, so that's going to give you a jump ring similar in size to this. These are not quite as big for this. So anything that you have that's kind of a structured thick paper or wood is going to be preferable to picking some sort of mandrel that's steel. So I'm going to take a piece of 16 gauge and I'm going to have a little bit overhang right here. And then the first wrap is the most critical. You want to get that as tight as possible, and that's the one that's going to want to move on you. So if you hold it in place, sometimes it's easier to take some pliers and brace your wrists on the table. And bring this around. And then once you get that first wrap, it's easier to move through the next ones. Now the thicker the wire you have, the harder it is to form around here. So sometimes annealing the wire before you start is helpful. If you had 18 gauge wire, and all I'm doing is holding this hand in place and I'm actually just turning the whole thing as I'm wrapping this. And it's this that's getting wrapped around, I'm not wrapping this part. If you have thinner wire, it's much, much easier to wrap around here. Now once you go to cut these jump rings, you're going to get, if you want 8 jump rings, you're going to make sure to wrap it 10 times because the 2 ends often aren't full jump rings. So I'm going to come in here. Notice a little about that gets wrapped as I go, right next to each other. There we go. Now if I did the 16 gauge, or sorry, the 18 gauge right here, you'll notice that's much easier to wrap and get started right here. I don't have to work so hard to make that come around. Again, tight along your form. So we're going to remove this. I'm going to go ahead and move to the Fortum so that we're going to go ahead and use a disc cutter to make a straight line through here. Some people are tempted to go ahead and just wire cut at this point. They just want to go and wire cut those ends, but you will end up with little pointed ends on either side, and if you have pointed ends where they meet, it's really hard to get them to meet together. They're going to catch on things if you wear them, and you would have to just file those two ends if you're going to solder these together if you're making a movable part. So I've got the 16 gauge and the 18 gauge wrapped. I think for the demo I'll just cut through the 18 gauge because it'll go a little bit faster. I went ahead and just flush cut those ends, and again, if you're going to use some wire cutters on here, I just wanted to get them out of the way so they didn't catch. If you're going to use the wire cutters, make sure any piece that you're cutting down, don't go up towards your eyes, just go down towards the table to cut. You never want to close your hands around here because you don't want to get your skin caught. So just a couple reminders about that. So I am going to just go ahead and remove this. We're going to work on here. Now I'm going to use a disc cutter. The disc cutters are these really thin, basically just discs that will allow you to come in on the Fordham and go through and cut metal. So if I spin this way, I'm going to want to start from the top edge. If I choose to spin at the forward motion of the Fordham, I'm going to go this way. Now because this is kind of screwed in, sometimes if you go one direction that will unthread depending on your Fordham. So in this particular one I'm going to actually start from away from me and have it turn this way. So I'm going to put it on the number 2 setting on my Fordham. A screwdriver just to tighten this up before you start. Sometimes if you slip, these things are really, really fragile. So you want to be really careful. Once you start cutting, you want to stay in that groove. They break just as easily as your saw blades do. So I'm going to take my check key, righty tighty lefty loosey. This goes in. I'm going to take the direction of that so I have my motor on too, so it's spinning this way. I'm going to come in here with an overhand grip, and I'm going to connect my hands so that I come in. Once I start, again, if I make a channel in here and I shift that orientation, this is going to snap on me. So you got your hair tied back, your glasses are on. I start in here, residential speed. Now you can build up some heat on here and some friction, so you just want to be aware of that. So once I start, I'm not coming straight down on all of them. I'm starting to cut one at a time as I go through. So I want to be patient, and if I have to start over again, I want to go right into that same area. And I want to actually cut into this popsicle stick, and as I go through that, they will come off. If you're cutting through wood, you will smell some of that kind of wood burning. And again, that's really hot friction-wise, so be really careful when you go to take these off. But these will fall off, and you will just go ahead and finish and cut them out. Cut all of those out. And when you've got really nice clean jump rings, so when you go to start hooking them together, you may have to get them connected. But again, just a reminder, you do not want to open them this way because you're never going to get that circle back again. Once you're done with this, make sure you're putting this away. If this breaks, just to change that out, you can come get this stuff up behind the teacher desk, hold that in place. You can take this and take that off. That disc, once it's chipped, is no longer good, so we'll just get a new one in there.